Welcome to Passion Institute. Today's podcast is quite emotional and I want to talk about leadership on the sand. It's going to be a bit of a hard conversation, but I felt very strongly about changing the podcast that was going to be aired and shifting it to this one. Just 2 days ago at Bondi Beach in Sydney, a place that's very well known around the world for sun and surf and the beach, there was a terror attack. And there was a terror attack that turned a community celebration into a lot of grief and heartbreak. 15 people were killed, including a 10-year-old girl, and more than 20 others were injured when a father and son opened a fire at the Hanukkah event by the beach. This was an attack on real families, on real people, and a community that was just gathering there to celebrate light in the middle of darkness. And in the horror, some of the things that came out were also astonishing. Leadership from ordinary people that weren't asked to step up, but did so anyway. We had, you may have heard about a gunman a man who tackled one of the gunmen and helped disarm him despite being shot himself. And also a video of a couple that were also trying to wrestle a weapon from the attacker and in the process lost their lives. As you've seen some of the videos emerge, what I wanted to do in this episode was tell the story of what we know so far. Obviously not everything and all the details have come out yet, but what does it mean from human terms? You know, this podcast that I started 4 years ago is called the Passion Institute. And so what is it that people felt so passionate about? The honour to be able to have the courage for those of the people that stood up, especially the bystander who tackled one of the shooters. And I wanted to share some lessons that are already coming out as I've reflected on this, around this pretty horrific tragedy. And so the first thing, for those of you that might not have heard it and listening to this for the first time, is Bondi Beach in Sydney was hosting a Hanukkah celebration called Hanukkah by the Sea. And families were there, children were playing, and people were just listening to music and lighting candles and just sharing some of the community. And then everything changed in a moment. A father and son arrived in a car and started opening fire on the crowd. And in a matter of minutes, 15 people were killed, including a 10-year-old girl. Another 20 people have been injured, and many of them are still in hospital in critical condition. And so people at the event described what sounded initially like fireworks, and then they realised that it was gunfire. Parents, as you would, grabbed their children and started to run. Some hid in nearby buildings, others dropped to the ground, and others tried to shield their loved ones so that they would be protected in what occurred. And obviously security guards moved people very quickly into safety as they could. Police later confirmed that this was being treated as a terrorist attack and that the gunmen were links to extremists and had also had some military style training. Both the gunmen have also now been critically wounded and taken to the hospital. And again, all of that is starting to come out. It's still very raw, particularly being an Australian, particularly seeing some of the footage and also receiving messages from family and friends all over the world. I just wanted to talk a minute about the bystander who tackled the gunman. And this has caught some of the world's attention at present. So ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has talked about the fact that one of the shooters who disarmed, one of the people that disarmed one of the shooters is Ahmed Al-Ahmed. He's still in hospital recovering from the gunshot that he received during the struggle as well. And the dashcam video and witness reports have shown that the civilians confronting, people to be able to disarm, like putting their lives at stake in terms of what they can do that. CNN also has spoken to some of the people and the cousin, and what do people do in the decisions that they make in a split second? So while there's bullets flying, this man made a decision not to run, not to hide, but to physically confront somebody with a loaded gun to protect people that were not his family, but just strangers on a beach. Not on uniform, not on duty, probably woke up that morning thinking it was going to be just a very extraordinary day, and not a moment that would define his courage in front of the whole world. And, to me, I think this was leadership distilled. Seeing that there was a gap in safety for people and stepping in it and risking it all, basically his own life, to protect others. There was also a beautiful scene that's coming up of Boris and Sophia Gurman, who were a couple in their 60s. They've been long-time locals of Bondi, and there was also some footage that talked about the fact that they were the couple that tried to disarm one of the shooters. As they moved towards the attacker, trying to wrestle the gun, both of them unfortunately were killed in the attack. And their families now released a statement about how wonderful, amazing humans that they were, and how brave and selfless they were in what they tried to do. And I was thinking about the fact that leadership is not an outcome, it's a choice. Every day it's a choice. It's the choice and the instinct to be able to move towards protecting others, even when there's no guarantee that you will do that. And Boris and Sophia and Ahmed, are all bystanders that showed us that leadership's not limited to boardrooms and parliaments and official titles. It can happen at a beach, it can happen at a festival, it can happen in a heartbeat. So as you might be listening to that at your home or in the workplace, or maybe you're in the car or taking a walk, I just wanted to share some of my reflections. And as I said, this will sit with me for quite a while, particularly as we enter the festive season. I will get to go on a Christmas break with my family who have not been killed or hurt in this particular attack, compared to many of those families that have lost that. A lot of the things in leadership, we talk about people that have got these roles allocated to them. Often we think when we're trying to step into leadership, well, when will I get that promotion? Or when could I have more experience? Or, when somebody puts me in charge, I'll do that. But the leadership at Bondi by a number of amazing individuals was tackling a gunman to the ground, running towards dangers when others were pulling away from that, turning around a car to help strangers. So in everyday life, it's, what does that look like? What do we take from Bondi? Well, it's being the person that speaks up when something's wrong. It's checking in the quiet when something seems off. It's taking responsibility rather than saying, that's not my job. And so why do I look for a title in leadership? And can I just choose to lead through some of my actions today? The second part is that the people in Bondi didn't have any body armour. They didn't have any tactical gear. They didn't have any hours to prepare. They literally saw things happening in front of them. They saw bodies, they saw cars, phones and voices, and they did whatever they could to assist. So leadership also doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have perfect plans, or you might not be fully trained, or, maybe somebody else was better suited. But these people sort of made these decisions. And really the lessons for me so far is the fact that we've already got some skills that have been built in. We've got to look to the people around us. And we often in leadership only have a very small time and a very small window to decide what we actually do. So leadership always asks, what can I do with what I have right now, not in the future? And how do I maybe even just start that hard communication with something that I have now? In a community, how can I give something small, maybe even a small circle, rather than waiting for a really big initiative? The other thing that really touched me about Bondi was that how it was that some people were running towards responsibility even though there wasn't, and how did that change the outcomes? A lot of bystanders fled, and I was thinking about what would I have done, and I think, if I've got my children there, I probably also would have tried to get them to safety. But there were others there that did the opposite. They moved towards the danger, not away from it. Ahmed tackled the gunman, for goodness sake. Boris and Sophia tried to disarm an attacker. By doing that, they would have off-put these attackers, I would have imagined. That their actions absolutely would have slowed down and changed the course of action, and they would have saved additional lives. I don't know how many. So leadership is not about seeking out danger, but how do you move towards that rather than look away? How do we move towards conflict when we're avoiding things at work? And how do you move towards the person that's being marginalised or bullied? How do you move towards a community that someone should fix rather than that someone could be you? Now, you might not be tackling gunmen, but right now you might be the one breaking the silence. Perhaps that's hurting other people, or you might be the one that stands up for that. I was also thinking about, how courage can be used for good and for healing. The Bondi attack has already sparked so much trauma, but there's also waves of solidarity coming in. There's not only support in Australia, But, vigils are being held in Bondi, but also all over the world as far as Jerusalem. And so the people are coming together to mourn, they're coming together to pray and stand against hatred. And as I do this podcast, please know I'm not relying on, these people were wrong and these people right. This is not a religious conversation for me. This is a leadership conversation for me. And, for example, the lifeblood and people giving blood donations, there's been over 50,000 appointments nationally that have happened with record numbers of people coming out and saying, how could we have something small in a concrete way to be able to give? So just as violence ripples outwards, I think so can courage and compassion. And in leadership, I think we can choose integrity to make it easier for others to do the same. We can show up for somebody in pain and normalise a bit of care. We can say, look, I'll help you, and open the doors for other people to join in. So what are the ripples of action that I can send out today? My team and my family, maybe even online in terms of what I do. And the last reflection so far that I've had is that it's so important to put humanity at the centre, especially after a crisis. In the aftermath of Bondi, mental health experts have been talking about the fact that it's so important to talk about psychological well-being for people. Let's have some honest conversations with children. I've had some honest conversations with my 2 teenagers in terms of not overwatching the distressing media. That trauma takes time and people will process it very differently. Leadership isn't just about what happens during a crisis, it's also about what happens next. How do we speak about the victims? How do we speak about and support the survivors? And how do we also guard ourselves against hatred or dehumanisation? So it's easy when we're faced with horror to be able to get really angry and let that anger consume us. But families, of victims have already come out and said, the senseless violence that took, and one of the things we need to do is look at decency, courage and peace. And so we can demand accountability for safety, we can tackle extremism, but at the same time, we've got to ask that in this darkness and this period, what will I choose to be? Will I be sitting there in anger or blame a particular culture or religion or people, or will I do things differently? So as I close, I just want to acknowledge that you might be a bit like me, feeling a bit shaken, a bit angry, or really deeply sad about what happened at Bondi. I think that's very normal. And if there was a trauma, not only for the people that were there, but for many people watching across Australia and also the world, there's no positive spin here. 15 people have lost their lives already, including a child. We just got to honour these people. We've got to honour their families. These people were parents and their children and their friends. They're not just a number in a headline. And we've also got to honour them. And what's emerging already is that the fact that there was a man that tackled a gunman. There was a couple who tried to take away a weapon from one of the shooters. There were bystanders and reporters who ran towards cries for help. Communities will gather in grief and solidarity. And so I believe leadership is about choosing to act when it would be easy to stay silent, protecting others even when it costs you, and holding on to your humanity when fear attempts for us to blame others. So how can I contribute in a little way? How can I have my voice heard? And so to everybody who's been directly affected by Bondi attack, my heart and our hearts are with you. To the heroes that step forward, thank you for the ones that are known, but also thank you to the ones that are unknown. Thank you for showing the world what courage looks like. I hope you take care of yourselves. I hope you check in on the people around you, and remember, you don't need a title to lead. You just need to decide and work out how it is that you move forward. Thank you for tuning in.